Hi, welcome back to the bookshelf of timeless classics from the Daily Better, a channel dedicated to sharing personal growth insights through great books. Have you ever felt frustrated either with yourself, your children, or your students because everything they study seems to slip away so quickly? Why is it that so many of us can't seem to retain what we've learned for long? We finish a book, and not long after, it's like we never read it at all. Why do we forget so easily? You're not alone in feeling this way, because forgetting is actually the brain's default setting. That's right, our brains are designed not to remember everything. So, how can we train our brains to listen to us? The answer lies within a book tentatively titled Exam Brain Science, written by Dr. Yuji Ikegaya, a neuroscientist and professor at the University of Tokyo. He's affectionately known as Dr. Hippocampus because of his deep research into that exact part of the brain. Through his light-hearted and witty writing, Dr. Ikegaya helps us understand how our brains are wired. If you want to truly remember something for the long haul, you have to grasp the system it runs on. If you just study on a whim based on mood or inspiration, chances are you'll be trapped forever in the cycle of learn today, forget tomorrow. So in today's video, the Daily Better will walk you through 4 methods from the book that can help you remember better and longer. First up, get past the strict gatekeeper, the hippocampus. You're probably wondering, what exactly is the hippocampus? Dr. Yuji Ikegaya, who's dedicated his career to studying this part of the brain, shows us that if you want to remember things long-term, you need to understand the role of the hippocampus. Think of your brain as being split into 2 major parts. To make it easier, imagine a computer. There's a central processor and a hard drive. The processor handles temporary operations. But the things you want to keep for the long term? Those get stored on the hard drive in your brain. That's your long-term memory. Every day, your brain receives information from the outside world. What you see, what you hear, what you say, touch, or feel. All of this goes into short-term memory first. Only later, if it passes a certain threshold, does it move into long-term storage. That part of the brain? That's the cortex, your biological hard drive. But to get from temporary storage to the cortex, information has to pass through a very picky gatekeeper, the hippocampus. This is the part of the brain that decides what's worth keeping. If something doesn't make the cut, the hippocampus simply discards it and you forget it. So, how does the hippocampus decide what stays and what goes? You need to know that the hippocampus is a very strict judge. Its pickiness goes all the way back to our primitive ancestors. The hippocampus evolved to help us survive. That means it prioritizes information tied to danger, pain, and life or death situations. For example, if a child touches a boiling kettle and gets burned, that pain will be etched into their memory. No adult needs to reinforce that lesson. Next time, they'll avoid anything that looks or feels like that hot kettle. Why? Because the brain marked it as a threat to survival. Now you might be thinking, what about the things I want to learn? Reading a book, picking up a new language, mastering a new skill, these are important, sure. But they're not exactly matters of life and death. So how do we convince the hippocampus to let these things into long-term memory? There's only one way. You have to trick it. You need to disguise what you're trying to remember as something tied to survival. You have to keep nudging the hippocampus over and over, until one day it makes a mistake and lets that information through the gate into your long-term memory. But how exactly do you trick the hippocampus? The first method is what we call the drip-drip effect, slow but steady. Imagine you're standing in front of the strict gatekeeper, the hippocampus. You send it a piece of information you want to remember. The first time, it shakes its head, nope, not getting through. The second time, still no. Third time, another rejection. But you keep trying. You feed it the same information again and again. Eventually, the hippocampus starts to wonder, why does this keep showing up? Could it be something critical to survival? And so, it gets a little confused, a little uncertain, until finally, it gives in and lets the information pass into deep memory. That's right. The first way to trick the hippocampus into helping you remember better is to repeat, repeat, repeat. This is the drip-drip method. You keep coming back to the same content until it soaks in. Here's a concept you should know, the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. We forget a certain percentage of what we learn within 1 hour, 24 hours, and 48 hours. For example, let's say you learn 10 new vocabulary words. After 4 hours, you'll have forgotten about half of them, just 5 remain. After 24 hours, maybe only 3 stick around. After 48 hours, just 2. So what should we do when memory starts to fade? There's no shortcut, we must review. Reviewing is the only way to slow down forgetting. In learning, reviewing isn't optional. Without it, memory doesn't truly form. But reviewing also needs rhythm. If not, you'll just wear yourself out without much effect. Based on how the hippocampus functions, the author proposes a review rhythm that I've tried myself, and it really works. The first review, 2 days after you first learned something. The second review, 1 week after that first review. The third review, 2 weeks after the second. The fourth review, 1 month after the third. Through these 4 review sessions, you'll see your memory sharpen dramatically. You'll almost feel like you've retained everything as long as you follow this rhythm and stay committed. This is how many top students consistently score high. Now, some people might say, I don't need to review like that. I'll just cram before the exam and still get a good grade. That's true, the author actually tested this. He found that spaced repetition and last-minute cramming can both produce similar exam scores at first. But 1 week later, those who crammed had forgotten almost everything. Because when your brain receives a sudden flood of information, it dumps it just as quickly. Meanwhile, those who reviewed steadily over time retained their knowledge far longer. Why? Because they'd gone through 4 solid review rounds. The hippocampus had been convinced this information mattered, maybe even for survival, and saved it to the brain's hard drive. Ask yourself, in 1 semester, how many exams do students take? 6? 8? If we forget almost everything after every test, what knowledge do we actually carry with us? Are we studying just to pass exams? Or to truly own the knowledge for the long haul? That's something every student should think about. One more thing the author advises. If you're learning something new, start with just 1 reference book. Study it, review it, stick with it until you really understand it. Don't try juggling multiple books at once. Because every time you study, it'll feel like you're learning something new all over again. And that makes it almost impossible to build lasting memory. Before we dive into more ways to trick the hippocampus, there's something else we need to understand, something just as important. It's a phenomenon generated inside our brains called LTP. So, what is LTP? Scientists have found that the more LTP you have in your brain, the better your ability to remember things. You've probably heard people say, we all have the same brain, no one is inherently dumber than anyone else. That's true, to an extent. Our brain capacities are pretty similar. But in reality, you'll notice that some people seem to absorb and retain information at lightning speed. Why is that? It's not about brain size, it's about how much LTP their brains generate. In earlier experiments, psychologists stimulated the hippocampus with tiny electrical pulses. With each stimulation, the brain produced more LTP. But of course, the rest of us don't have access to electric tools to zap our hippocampus into working harder. And if we're not actively reviewing and repeating what we learn, how can we boost our LTP levels? Think about it. Some people seem to remember things after just one exposure. The author points out that while we've heard of alpha and beta waves, there's another wave, theta waves, that we often overlook. Theta waves appear when we become curious. And when they show up, the brain starts producing LTP, even without hippocampal stimulation. When you're curious about something, you feel drawn to it, excited by it. Like Leonardo da Vinci, well into his 60s and 70s, he was still studying the tongue of a woodpecker. Fascinated by nature, immersed in discovery. People like that have incredible memories. Why? Because they don't force themselves. They're not learning out of obligation or stress. They're simply curious, like a 3-year-old discovering the world for the first time. That's why children often remember things effortlessly. You don't need to repeat something to a child over and over if it sparks their curiosity. They'll remember it after a single experience. Curiosity is incredibly powerful. Hold on to your childlike wonder, your hunger to explore the world. As Leonardo da Vinci once said, just as eating without appetite harms your health, learning without curiosity damages your memory. And Rousseau, the philosopher, once said, the more knowledge a person has, the greater their curiosity becomes. Curiosity and memory feed into each other. When your curiosity rises, so does your ability to remember. And the more you learn, the more curious you become. That's why the author especially advises high school students. Be mindful of one particular phrase. Ugh, this is so boring. You'll hear that line a lot in Japanese manga students moaning about how dull something is. Maybe the textbook is dry, maybe the teacher's monotone. You'll always find reasons to reject a subject. I used to be like that too. Whenever it was time for history or political science, I'd sigh with dread. And the moment I labeled it boring, my behavior changed. I'd tune out in class, nod off, do the bare minimum just to scrape by and avoid failing. Looking back now, I regret wasting those opportunities to truly learn. Now that I want to study those things, I barely have the time. You know what? The mindset you bring to a subject changes everything. Change your attitude, and your actions will follow. If you just stop saying boring and gradually allow yourself to feel curious, even if you dislike the teacher or the curriculum or how the school presents the subject, you'll find that curiosity transforms the experience. You'll gain far more than just good grades. Don't study for grades, study for yourself. Those dry history dates, distant political doctrines, or confusing classical poems, even if they don't directly apply to your future job, they help shape a broader, deeper worldview. Every piece of knowledge has its own worth. The more you accumulate, the wider and deeper your understanding becomes. And when your mind expands, so does your perspective on life. So whenever you have the chance and the time to learn, cherish it. Approach learning with curiosity, and you'll remember things more vividly, more deeply. And the lessons you absorb in school? They'll echo throughout your life in ways you never imagined. The third method that can help boost your memory is something called the lion memory technique. Lions and humans are both mammals. So, when do mammals engage their deep memory systems and display their strongest learning abilities? It's when they're doing something related to eating or survival. There are 3 key traits of a lion that we should learn from, and they can significantly enhance our memory. 1. Hunger. When a lion is hungry, its brain becomes especially alert. It needs to quickly recognize what is safe to eat and what isn't. The same applies to humans. When we're hungry, the hormones released trigger the hippocampus to generate more LTP. It's almost like giving your brain a tiny electric jolt to wake it up. So, the best time to memorize something? Right before a meal. But most people do the opposite. Whether it's us or our children, we get home from work or school and relax first. Watch TV, play games, eat dinner, and then try to study. But in reality, when you're hungry, your brain is working at full power. That pre-dinner window? It's prime time for memorization. And when should we play or relax? After eating. Once you're full, your blood flows to your stomach and digestive system. Trying to study during this time is exhausting, ineffective, and for kids, it can even cause stomach pain. So let them rest a bit. Watch TV, play games, read something light. 2. Movement. Lions pace back and forth while hunting. When I was studying abroad, I used to wonder, why were so many students out in the early morning, walking around campus with a book in hand, reading out loud or mumbling to themselves? It wasn't until I read this book that I realized that's actually a powerful way to boost memory. The author even recommends using commute time, whether you're swaying on a subway or rocking on a bus. That gentle motion mimics a lion on the move, triggering a state of alertness that helps with memorization. 3. Cold. The last lion-like trait is coldness. When the temperature drops, your body perceives it as a mild survival threat. This slightly cold sensation triggers your brain to become more alert and retain more information. So when studying, don't make your room too cozy. Avoid overheating it with heaters or blasting the warmth. Keep things slightly cool, it's better for your brain. In short, learn like a lion. Hungry, moving, and slightly cold. The final method to trick the hippocampus is both fascinating and powerful. Activate the amygdala and you'll find yourself remembering longer, deeper, and more vividly. The amygdala is a part of the brain responsible for triggering emotional highs. When we stir up our own emotions, the hippocampus gets fooled. It can't tell the difference between what's tied to life or death survival and what simply stirs us emotionally. And it ends up sending both types of information into long-term memory. Think about it, those deeply emotional moments in your life? They're almost impossible to forget. Your first love. Your first heartbreak. The first time you left home and your parents waved goodbye at the train station. The first time you got into a fight with a neighborhood kid and cried after being hit. Any time you experience intense emotions, whether joy, fear, pain, or love. Your memories tend to go deeper, anchoring themselves in your long-term storage. Why? Because the brain cells around your hippocampus are activated and organized during those moments. The author explains, if you try to memorize something without attaching any emotion to it, you're very likely to forget it. But if you add even the slightest bit of emotion, even if it's imagined, you'll remember instantly. Take this example. When did the Normandy landings happen? If all you learn is 1944, it's just a dry number, easy to forget. But now, try this. Picture yourself living in that moment in history. Feel the tension, the sacrifice, the fear and determination of Allied soldiers storming the beach. They knew many wouldn't make it home. Yet they ran into the fire, not just for their own countries, but for the future of the world, a world free from Nazi tyranny. Chaos, gunfire, screams, mud, blood. And then finally, victory. A victory not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts of millions yearning for freedom. Now feel that victory. Let it sink in. And remember that the Normandy landings were one of the greatest turning points of World War II in 1944. Strangely enough, when I retell that story imagining myself right there, the number 1944 becomes etched in my mind. It won't leave. The author says quite humorously, you don't need to cry when recounting history. That would be a bit much. But you can imagine the scene, place yourself in it. Then, the neurons around your amygdala might evaluate those emotions as survival-level stimuli and preserve them deep in your long-term memory. This is a truly powerful trick for better retention. Now finally, I want to add one last but incredibly important element: sleep. Many people suffer from poor or insufficient sleep, and the next day they find their memory fuzzy, their recall sluggish, and their minds forgetful. Why? Because the hippocampus simply didn't have time to process everything. It hurriedly discarded what seemed unimportant. When you sleep, your shoulders, back, arms, and legs all rest. But your brain? It's different. It doesn't rest. Your brain is extraordinary. It works even as you sleep. The hippocampus quietly goes to work, organizing and filtering all the information you encountered that day. So here are 3 things to remember about sleep. First, just like when you're hungry, the time right before bed is ideal for memorizing something. The brain is getting ready to store information. Use that moment wisely. Second, don't be afraid of sleeplessness. Don't panic if you can't fall asleep. Most of the exhaustion the next day comes not from lack of sleep, but from worrying about it. Many people make the mistake of turning to music, podcasts, or screens when they can't sleep. In truth, all you need to do is close your eyes and lie still. That alone mimics the effect of sleep. Don't flood your brain with new input. That only burdens it more, and the hippocampus won't have enough time to process. And third, get enough sleep. Your brain needs it to do its most important organizing work. So in the end, we need to restructure how we approach learning. Managing your time well is one of the most brain-friendly and scientific ways to maximize your potential. That's everything I wanted to share with you today through this fascinating book. I hope these insights will be truly helpful. Once you finish reading this book, you'll find yourself improving not only your learning techniques, but also your understanding of how your brain works. You'll begin to use your mind in a more intentional, efficient, and scientific way. Wishing you success on this journey. Thank you for listening to The Daily Better, a channel dedicated to sharing personal growth insights through great books. If you found today's video helpful, please share it with someone who might need it. Support us by clicking like, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss our weekly uploads. And if you have any thoughts or feelings to share, drop them in the comments below. Thank you, goodbye, and see you in the next video.